Good evening and welcome to NTD UK News. I'm Stuart Leeson here at today's top stories. The UK reports 25 more cases of blood clots among people receiving the AstraZeneca vaccine. COVID-19 infections appear to be stable despite schools reopening. And when pubs reopen in 10 days' time, every customer will need to sign in. The UK now has reports of 30 cases of rare blood clots following receipt of the AstraZeneca vaccine, though health officials say the evidence for a link is too limited to halt the vaccine rollout.
UK regulators on Thursday said they have identified 30 cases of rare blood clots after the use of the AstraZeneca COVID-19 vaccine. That's 25 more than the Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency previously reported. Over 18 million doses of the jab have been given out in the UK. The agency says it has received no such reports of blood clots following the use of the BioNTech Pfizer vaccine. UK health officials say the evidence is still too limited and cases too rare to halt the rollout. The chief executive of the MHRA said the benefits of COVID-19 vaccine AstraZeneca in preventing COVID-19 infection and its complications continue to outweigh any risks, and the public should continue to get their vaccine when invited to do so. On Thursday, Germany said people under 60 years old who have had the first shot of the AstraZeneca vaccine should receive a different product for their second dose. Out of side effect concerns, other countries in Europe are also restricting the use of the jab. Others have fully resumed inoculations after briefly halting the rollout. The WHO on Wednesday said it continues to monitor the situation, but that the shot's benefit-risk profile weighs heavily in favour of its use.
Infections from the CCP virus appear to be stable, with no signs to suggest the reopening schools has caused more cases.
The latest data from the Office of National Statistics suggests that in the last week of March, about 150,000 people in England had the CCP virus, about 14,000 less than the week before. That's despite the return of millions of pupils to school. The ONS says the data is encouraging. It's from random sampling, which is regarded as the most reliable measure of infection rates. It means confirmed cases appear to have plateaued, leading to fresh hope for further easing of lockdown restrictions. Meanwhile, as infection rates seem stable, for others a range of symptoms under the umbrella of so-called long COVID drag on. It's estimated that 1.1 million people were experiencing long COVID during February to March, after contracting the virus several months before. The ONS estimates about 700,000 cases began with an infection at least 12 weeks before, while 70,000 had contracted the virus at least 1 year earlier. Health Secretary Matt Hancock says he is worried about its impact on people's long-term health.
It's one of the many damaging problems of this virus. We're putting more research money into tackling and understanding long COVID because it appears to be several different syndromes.
Symptoms of long COVID or post-COVID syndrome vary but include fatigue, muscle pain, and difficulty concentrating. Hancock announced £18 million in funding in February for major studies into the long-term effects of the virus.
Over 70 MPs warn against domestic vaccine passports, calling them divisive and discriminatory. Politicians opposing the scheme include former Conservative leader Sir Ian Duncan Smith and the leader of the Liberal Democrats. NTD's Jane Worrell has the details.
There's mounting opposition against the idea of a domestic passport proving your COVID vaccination status. 72 MPs have voiced their concerns, saying COVID passports would deny individuals access to general services, businesses or jobs. Among them 40 Conservative MPs, including former Conservative leader Sir Ian Duncan Smith and the chair of the 1922 committee Sir Graham Brady, plus Liberal Democrat leader Sir Ed Davey and former Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn. The Prime Minister has already said proof of a vaccine will likely be required for international travel.
On the issue of vaccine certification, there's definitely going to be a world in which international travel will use vaccine passports.
He said locally a combination of factors would bring confidence to businesses.
I think when it comes to trying to make sure that we give maximum confidence to business and to customers, and here in the UK, there are three things: is your immunity, whether you've had it before, so whether you've got natural antibodies anyway, whether you've been vaccinated, and then of course whether you've had a test.
It follows comments from the current Labour leader, who told The Telegraph that vaccine passports are against the British instinct. The growing opposition comes amid reports that vaccine passports will be trialled at large events, including the FA Cup final. Some companies, like the cruise liner Royal Caribbean, already require passengers over 18 to prove they've had the jab. The UK's pub industry say they are dismayed at the idea and say that it could prevent millions of young people from visiting the pub unless they've had a negative test. The government's reviewing the domestic passport scheme and say that a decision is yet to be made. Jane Werrell, NTD News, London.
Pubs will reopen on April the 12th, but only their outdoor spaces, and every customer will also have to sign in. Industry bodies are not happy about the rules. NTD's Neil Woodrow has more.
Part of the rules for the reopening of pubs is that all customers should use the COVID-19 app to scan in on entry or leave their details with the venue. The details are kept for 21 days. But the pub industry says that this will add more confusion and inconvenience for customers and staff. In the last reopening, it was one person from each group who would register, so things have tightened up this time. Details of the staff working each shift must also be held. Venues must also take reasonable steps to refuse entry to anyone who doesn't comply, and any business found not to follow the rules can face fines starting at £1,000. Chief Executive of the British Beer and Pub Association, Emma McClarkin, told the BBC on Friday pubs are looking forward to reopening again, but only 40% will have the required outdoor space, and that this would be loss-making given the restrictions. In a joint statement, UK Hospitality, the British Beer and Pub Association and the British Institute of Innkeeping say the government has refused to confirm that payment at the bar will be permitted, which they say will be a big problem for rural pubs with poor connectivity levels. The substantial meal part has gone from the rules this time, so you can just go and have a drink without the Scotch egg. Neil Woodrow, NTD News, Epsom, Surrey.
The government has expanded its COVID-19 travel ban. 4 more countries have been added to the so-called red list. From next Friday, the 9th of April, travellers from Pakistan, Kenya, Bangladesh and the Philippines will be refused entry into England. Only British and Irish citizens and residents will be allowed to enter, but they must stay in a government-approved quarantine facility for 10 days. The government said this is to protect the country from new variants of the CCP virus. Campaigners are starting legal action against the government's ban on trips by care home residents. They say the ban is unlawful.
A charity says banning care home residents in England from taking trips breaks equality and human rights legislation. John's campaign, which campaigns for the rights of families and care home residents, has sent a legal letter to the Health Department. According to government guidance, under lockdown restrictions, visits out of care homes should only be considered for care home residents of working age. That's for under 65-year-olds only. And that care homes should support trips for residents only in exceptional circumstances, such as to visit a friend or relative at the end of their life. On return, the resident must self-isolate for 2 weeks. A spokesperson of the Health Department tells NTD that they know how crucial visits are in supporting the health and well-being of care home residents. Nearly all care home residents now have had at least 1 dose of a COVID-19 vaccine. The campaigners say the progress made on vaccinations and testing makes the 14-day isolation unnecessary. Lead A solicitors, representing John's campaign, say the blanket ban is unlawful, and that failure to ensure risk assessments for every resident who wishes to make a trip is unlawful too.
An expert from University of Edinburgh says medical students should learn Shakespeare to better understand their patients. Dr. David Jeffries says Shakespeare's extraordinary empathy for other people could help medical students in a clinical setting. He says Shakespeare's ability to depict the world from another person's point of view creates a space for reflection, which is a central part of clinical practice and medical education. He finds King Lear has many examples of how to deal with suffering and family conflicts, which could help doctors dealing with families facing an end-of-life decision. And in other news, the government has announced details of which arts organisations across the country will receive £400 million of funding to help them weather the pandemic. NTD's Patrick Hayden takes a look.
2,700 museums, theatres, cinemas and arts venues will receive £400 million worth of government grants and loans. It's to help the sector reopen and recover from the pandemic. Entertainment venues across Britain were forced to close last March and some partially reopened last summer. But since then, all have been shut. Last year, the government unveiled a nearly £1.6 billion culture recovery fund. On Friday, it detailed where the last tranche of the funding will go. Over £170 million in repayable finance will be offered to organisations including the National Theatre and Royal Shakespeare Company. The English Heritage Trust, which looks after 420 historic monuments, buildings and objects, will receive more than £23 million, and the British Film Institute has been awarded over £6 million to help independent cinemas. The government has been accused of being slow to hand out the funds. A parliamentary watchdog says that the first nearly £500 million of the £1.6 billion was only paid out late February. Patrick Hayden, NTD News, London.
Coming up, in Taiwan's worst rail disaster in 40 years, at least 50 were killed when a train derailed in a tunnel. That and more when we return.